Welcome to the seventh part of our history of mission. And as we start today, I think we need to listen to a serious warning from former Bishop Stephen Neale and his book, A History of Christian Missions. This is what he says. The year 500 AD marks the start of a period of bitter and disheartening conflict. The church was called to engage in desperate struggles on two quite different fronts. On one, after more than 500 years of effort, it was to emerge almost wholly victorious. On the other, it was to endure fearful losses, and for more than 600 years to do little more than hold its own. And it's with that latter struggle, which lasted for more than 600 years and to some degree still continues today, that we're going to concern ourselves now. And it all starts with the story of two baby boys. Both were born in the Middle East. Both were born to Middle Eastern parents. However, the two babies are separated by not only 500 years of history, but also some 1,500 kilometers of mainly desert land. The birth of each boy has changed the course of the world. The first baby boy was born just over 2,000 years ago, and his birth, which we will soon be celebrating, is, I guess, the reason you're all here today on this Zoom, the reason we are now studying a history of Christian mission. But it's the birth of the second baby boy that we're going to consider today. The second boy was born in AD 570 in Mecca, a city in Arabia. He was born a few months after his father, Abdullah, who was only aged 24, had died on a trading trip. When news of the birth was brought to the 72-year-old grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather took the child in his arms and he gave thanks to God. I guess not dissimilar from something that Simeon had done almost 600 years earlier. And this grandfather called the baby the Praised One, which I think I'm right in saying in Arabic is Muhammad. This boy's family belonged to the powerful Quraysh tribe, where his father was a leading citizen. Now, the Quraysh tribe were custodians of the Kaaba. That's a huge black stone which had probably fallen into the desert as a meteorite. But one of the unique customs of the Quraysh tribe was that the mothers would hand their child over to a nurse in a Bedouin tribe, so that the child could breathe in the healthy desert air. And that's what happened to Muhammad. His mother, who was called Amina, gave Muhammad to Halima, who nursed him for 2 years in the desert and then brought him back to his mother. But Amina, the mother, declared that she still didn't want him to breathe what she considered the unwholesome, unhealthy air of Mecca, and so back again he went to the desert. Another 2 years passed before the nurse appeared again, but this time she was very troubled. The child had had what seemed like numerous epileptic fits, which made her think that he might be demon-possessed. However, she did take him back, but after many subsequent fits, she returned him to her mother when he was just 5 years old. And Muhammad always gratefully remembered Halima's care of him. Now, Muhammad's mother, Amina, died when he was 6 years old. So his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, then took care of him. But he died only 2 years later, aged 80. So think about it. By the time Muhammad was 8 years old, his father, his mother, and finally his grandfather had all passed away. So he was then raised by his paternal uncle called Abu Talib, who, interestingly enough, history indicates that of all the family, never embraced Islam. Muslims will often teach that Muhammad was an orphan who raised himself up from nothing by his own efforts. Well, at 12 years of age, he was taken on a merchant trip to Damascus by his uncle. And at 25 years old, he entered the service of a rich widow whose name was Khadijah, and he married her. She was older than him. She was about 40 years old, and she herself had been married twice already before. But nonetheless, she bore him 2 sons and 4 daughters. Both sons died in infancy, and sadly, 3 of the 4 daughters also died in childhood. Now, during the 25 years he was married to her, he took no other wife. Later, Muhammad was to have many wives. I think it was something like 10 or 11. One of those wives he would marry was called Aisha, and he married her when he himself was over 50, but she was only 9 years old. Now, that was not unusual, according to historians, amongst 6th century Arabs. The implications, though, however, are rather worrying. Aisha used to say that he loved 3 things: women, scents, that's perfumes, and food. And it was at about the age of 40, he started frequently retiring to a cave for meditation on the slopes of a mount called Mount Hira. It was about 3 miles, 5 kilometers from Mecca. After doing this for some time, it was said that he became greatly disturbed by messages he was receiving, not knowing whether they were from God or the devil. Apparently, he said they were sent down regularly through the angel Gabriel. Some seem to think he went into a trance, and he himself was afraid he might be possessed. Nonetheless, he recited these messages to a growing number of followers. His monotheistic message was, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. Often it was prefixed with people saying, God is great, God is great. Of course, they didn't say it in English, they said in Arabic, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasul Allah. His followers were initially members of his own family. Khadijah, his wife, Ali, a cousin, and an adopted son. And Muhammad set the terms of membership as follows. The convert must recognize that God, or Allah, as he was called, is one, and that Muhammad speaks for him. And in accepting this, the convert surrenders himself to the Almighty. Now that's significant because the word for submission or for surrender to the will of God is Islam. Well, this small group were joined by Abu Bakr. He was a wealthy merchant and an important figure in the early history of Islam. Indeed, he was to become the successor to Muhammad and the consolidator of Islam. Maybe I should just add that there was a lot of disagreement about who should have been the successor of Muhammad. Should it have been somebody from within his own family? And the results of that we still see today. Different factions within Islam. There's the Sunni Muslims, there are the Shiite Muslims. But the history of that goes back to who should be the follower, the descendant from Muhammad himself. Anyway, there was growing hostility and persecution from the leaders in Mecca against this teaching from Muhammad about Muhammad. And it really forced them to leave this little group and seek asylum elsewhere. Muhammad finally settled in Yathrib, as it was called then. Today it's known as Medina. It's about 250 or almost 400 kilometers to the north. And there, people were favorably disposed towards him and his teaching. It was here he built the great mosque. The mosque became the center of worship and meeting for Muslims. Now, this emigration from Mecca to Medina took place in 622 AD. And that's an important date because it really marks the foundation, if you like, of Islam. And in the following 8 years, Muhammad and his followers succeeded in bringing the whole Arabian Peninsula under his control. Now, how was that possible? That's a huge area of mainly desert. How did that happen in such a short time? Well, the citizens were long weary of internal strife, so they welcomed a leader who could unite them. And so we thus see the early formation of a power base that was in reality a bringing together of an increasing number of disparate tribes through a common identity and a common leader. Interestingly enough, even Christians and Jews were initially sympathetic to the teaching because Muhammad taught on the unity of God and on the condemnation of idolatry. And it was here that many of the now familiar doctrines of Islam took shape. For example, in 624 AD, there was a battle involving Muhammad's forces, the Battle of Badr. And at this battle, Muhammad's forces were victorious. And the importance of the outcome of that battle lies in the sanction that was given from that time onwards to holy war, which is called jihad, when Islam is considered to be under threat. That is now a permissible response. Muhammad died in 632 AD when he was just 62 years old. And the year he died, before he died, he delivered his last message from Allah, as he would say. And this is what he said, a part of it. Today, I have completed my religion for you, and I have fulfilled the extent of my favor towards you. It is my will that Islam be your religion. I have completed my mission. I have left you the book of Allah and clear commandments. If you keep them, you will never go wrong. Well, Caliph, as they were known, caliphs, leaders, Abu Bakr proved a victorious successor for Islam. Much was achieved in a short time. The Christian church in North Africa was completely overthrown, with one notable exception. the Coptic Church in Egypt, which survives today as a significant minority Christian group in an overwhelmingly Islamic context. But sadly, the church that had numbered such notable figures as Augustine, Tertullian, Cyprian, and Athanasius found itself, through disobedience and division, quite unable to resist the advancing forces of Islam. There are serious lessons for us today which are quite obvious and somewhat salutary. I mean, for example, in Acts of the Apostles in the Bible, chapter 11, verse 26, we read, the disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. Well, if you visit Antioch today, Antioch is in modern-day Turkey, I very much doubt you will hear the word or the name Christian, but I know for sure you will hear 5 times a day from the minarets of many mosques around that city the call to prayer. So let me ask 2 important questions and try to give you 2 important answers. The 2 questions are this: how was it Islam advanced so rapidly? And question 2, how was it the church retreated and collapsed so rapidly? So first of all, how was it that Islam advanced so rapidly? Well, I've already touched on this. Islam united warring desert tribes. It gave them a sense of mission. The mission of Islam is to conquer the world. And it's the same today. At the same time, Islam imposed a unity upon these warring tribes, a unity that had never been known before. So now they were united, they had a common goal, and they were willing together with great enthusiasm to try and see that achieved. Muslims are dedicated to carrying out the will of God as Muhammad saw it. It's a monotheistic message. You can almost say this is the greatest counterfeit of Christianity in some ways. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. So there was total commitment and death for a Muslim in the hands of an enemy was a guarantee of immediate promotion to paradise. Islam affects every aspect of society. We're not talking about a religion on the peripheral of a society. It's integrated and has grown to impact every aspect. For instance, food, the food you eat, how animals are slaughtered, halal, the diet that you have. It's affected dress, how you dress, how men dress, how women dress. It's affected the law. They have their own legal system, Sharia law. It's affected the education. The teaching of Islam is integral to an education system. There is family structure, how men and women, their separate roles in the family, the whole political system, the Islamic way of governing the country, and even use of money and how money can fairly gain interest. So you can see if somebody becomes a Christian from a conservative, overwhelmingly Islamic society, it's going to impact every area of their life, and there is going to be sometimes a high price, even the ultimate price to pay. Muslims saw opportunity now to extend their civilization worldwide, from the desert to the land. And from the death of Muhammad in 632 AD, that was only 10 years after the whole thing had begun. From that date until 661 AD, there were 4 great leaders known as caliphs who succeeded Muhammad. And during their reigns, which if you do the maths only covered 29 years, the forces of Islam had conquered the great civilizations in Syria, in Egypt, in Persia, and in Palestine. The 3rd caliph extended the empire westwards through North Africa, and so it continued into Central Asia, Western India, as well as into parts of Europe. Let me try and show you this. I've got this written down for you, and I can take this through. You can have a look. So this is what it looks like. I've put the dates on the left, and you can see here, 632, all Arabia won for Islam, and that was the year that Muhammad died, having started in 622. Jerusalem taken the next year, Antioch taken the year after that, 640 AD, Caesarea, Palestine and Syria. 641 AD, Alexandria, that's just a big city in Egypt, but then all of Egypt. And that was within 10 years of his death. 650, the ancient empire of Persia was destroyed. That's modern day Iran. 697, Carthage fell. That's where Perpetua, you'll remember at the start of this series, was martyred. By 715, most of Spain was conquered. And then, and this is a very important date, I would say an important date in the whole of history, 732, there was a major check because there was a big battle in France between Tours and Poitiers, so pretty much in central France, where the forces of Charles Martel had a great victory over the advancing Islamic armies. One of the most important battles in history. It meant that Europe remained Christian. I mean, if that had been a successful battle for the Muslims, all of France, and then I guess probably all of the UK where I am, would have fallen. 846, Rome was plundered. 902, Sicily was Muslim Islamic, strongholds on the Italian coast, and then going even further forward, 1453, Constantinople fell to the Turks. And so the eastern outpost of the empire, the former Roman Empire, was lost. Constantinople today is the largest city in the whole of Europe, Istanbul in Turkey. So we can see the rapid advance of Islam in a relatively short period of time. That's the first question. What about the second question? How was it that civilization and the church collapsed so rapidly? Sadly, there were big problems in the church. Firstly, there were those who were holding the heretical doctrines over the person of Christ. And there was a lot of argument and discussion, which probably needed to take place over Christ's nature. So was he two different people in one body? Was he a human being and then he would switch to being divine? Or was he one nature? And this took up a lot of time and discussion. Then there were a lot of divisions in the church. There were divisions over growing denominations. How do you do church? How do you run a church? I would say perhaps amongst the biggest problems of all was just sheer nominalism. People who were Christians by name, maybe because their particular tribe had been invaded by the Romans, And because they were part of the Roman Empire, they were de facto Christians, not through personal commitment, but just because they were now part of another civilization. There was arguments about money, arguments about buildings. There was hierarchical structure within the way the church was run. You'd have priests, and then you'd have bigger priests, you'd have bishops, you'd have archbishops. There was jealousy. A lot of rituals had come in to Christian worship, which were never there with the early church, down to even the sort of robes that the clerical leaders needed to wear, who were, of course, paid to be priests. And then the diabolical combination of politics and religion. So the church had very little to offer the invading, advancing forces of Islam. Added to that, under the dying embers of the Roman Empire, taxes were extremely heavy. There was huge corruption in the administration. And then conversion traffic was all one way. What I mean by that is there were many, many Christians becoming Muslims, but very few Muslims becoming Christians. There was religious freedom, but again, the religious freedom was really only practically in one direction. You were free to convert from Christianity to Islam, not the other way around. And I have to say, in many countries, exactly the same approach and attitude and belief system operates. However, there was not a great loss of life. With the advance of Islam, it was not perhaps as violent as it's sometimes been portrayed or represented. Why? Well, it's a pragmatic answer in that Muslims wanted to get the land, but they needed to use the population there to continue the work in the land. They needed administrators, they needed government clerks, they needed translators, they needed farmers. I mean, that was important, farmers. The Arabs were not farmers, of course not. They were men and people of the desert. They knew about sand, they knew about camels, they knew nothing about cultivating, raising livestock. So the population that was in situ needed, by and large, to remain there under the authority of Islam. And so many did convert from Christianity to Islam. Those who didn't convert remained second-class citizens with a loss of equality and a loss of privilege. In fact, some Christians, a few, rose to fairly high positions in the government, but there was ceaseless pressure to convert, which many ended up doing. The result of all this was no longer did all roads lead to Rome. The Roman Empire was finished. It had collapsed, not just externally, but internally, morally. The whole thing was just devastated. And now it was Islam, not Rome, that controlled the principal land and the sea routes. And of course, it was later in the very deserts where they'd come from that was discovered the incredible resource of oil. Some Muslims say today, they say, because we've remained faithful to Allah for 1400 years, he has rewarded us with oil. Oil changed everything in a very short time. You go back just 50 years, go back 1970 to places like, I don't know, Oman and Kuwait. And the Arabs are there going through the desert on their donkeys. but on their camels, sorry. But in a very short time, they've exchanged their camels for Mercedes. They've exchanged their Bedouin tents for superb, ornate palaces. Christianity receded to becoming a mainly European religion. And if things weren't bad enough, they're about to become much worse. We're not going to consider that today, but in the coming weeks, we're going to see something truly sad that happened in the history of the church because of the presence of Islam. Let me finish by just considering in passing maybe one major difference between Christianity and Islam. I mean, what I'm sharing with you today is just a very brief overview. If you go to Bible schools today, you can do whole Islamic courses. But one difference that perhaps is the greatest difference is there's no possibility of a personal relationship with God in Islam. None whatsoever. Your role as a Muslim is as a servant before a master. That's the relationship, master and servant. You are to obey, you are to do, no place for any questioning. But Jesus said, I no longer call you servants. I've called you friends. That's John 15, verse 15. And to call God your Father in Islam would be blasphemous. God is not your Father. He's your master. He's your judge. But Jesus said, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. John 14, verse 9. In Islam, you're expected to follow a rigid, inflexible, unchanging, legalistic code of practices. And just to keep the pressure on, Muslims believe that there are two angels watching over you throughout your life, one, as it were, on each shoulder. One of them is recording all the good things you do and writing them down in a book. The other is recording all the bad things you do and writing them down in a book. And then on the day of judgment, the books will be opened and the good deeds and the evil deeds of men and women will be placed on the scales. And those Muslims who have sufficient personal merit and righteousness, plus, of course, the hoped for, but you can never be sure of, the favor and mercy of Allah, that will be weighed against the bad deeds. And provided the good deeds outweigh the bad deeds, then you can go to eternal heaven. But if the bad deeds outweigh the good deeds, then it's to eternal hell. John Stott says this: the repeated promises in the Quran of the forgiveness of a compassionate and merciful Allah are all made to the meritorious. In other words, those whose merits have been weighed in Allah's scales. Whereas the gospel is good news of mercy to the undeserving. He finishes by saying this: the symbol of the religion of Jesus is not the scales, it's the cross. So if we've done 1,000 good things and just a few bad things, without the cross, without the blood of Jesus Christ, God's Son, which cleanses us from all sin, it's in vain. But there's hope for everybody based on what Christ has done for us. I'll finish with a brief story. A friend was a good friend of a Muslim imam or leader, And this was a Christian friend who was the good friend of the Imam. And that's a good way to start the story, friendship in that way. And the Imam said, look, I've been reading the Quran and it says in the Quran that Jesus is coming again. But I don't know anything about this. Could you come to the mosque and just explain to our people what it means that Jesus is coming again? And this Christian missionary was quick at thinking on his feet. He said, well, look, if you want me to come and preach in the mosque about the second coming of Jesus, I'm going to have to come twice. Because I need to come first time to explain why Jesus came the first time, and the second time to explain why Jesus came the second time. And he did on 2 consecutive Fridays. There are great opportunities. And maybe I'll speak a little more about this next week, as I can see our time has almost gone. Mulu, can you please unmute us all? Bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Gareth.
That's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks
Gary.
for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next
Thank you,
week.
Gareth. Glad I could hear you this week.
Great. Is that Chris Elston?
Glad I could hear you this week.
Oh, great. I can see you too.
Yes,
Well
I'm here. I can hear you
Are
this
you
week.
in Moldova? Are you still in
I'm in
Moldova?
Moldova, yes.
You're in
Yes.
Moldova. Good. So you managed to get the link. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
here.
Great, great. Yeah, we've got people from India, people from Philippines. Get your friends to come. Invite others. Hi, Caroline. Lovely to see you. God bless you all.
Thank you.
And I hope you all have a